Hey everyone, my name is Nikki Young, and this is Serial Napper, the #1 true crime podcast for naps. I'm back with another true crime story to lull you to sleep or perhaps to give you nightmares. 14-year-old British Columbia teenager Reena Virk struggled to fit in. She was relentlessly bullied from elementary school all the way to high school. Self-conscious about her looks and struggling with her strict religious parents' rules, times were tough. So on November 14th, 1997, when she received a phone call inviting her out to a social gathering, she gladly accepted. She had no idea that the invite was all a part of a revenge plan, retaliation for allegedly spreading rumors about one of the other girls. Shortly after arriving, she was swarmed by a group of 8 teenagers and severely beaten. When she tried to get away and stumble home, 2 of them followed her and dragged her down below a bridge where they continued to beat her before drowning her in the water. Reena's brutal murder at the hands of a group of teens prompted people across the country to take a closer look at growing violence and bullying amongst young Canadians. And it's a crucial reminder of the importance of raising an empathetic, caring future generation. So let's jump right in. Canada is seen by a lot of the rest of the world as very safe and friendly, which is true, but Canada certainly isn't immune to violence, bullying, and murder. I was 11 years old when the story of the brutal murder of 14-year-old Reena Virk was front page of every newspaper. She was so young, and then to be killed so violently by a gang of her peers, it was shocking. But it was also a wake-up call for a lot of Canadians that we aren't always as friendly, welcoming, and accepting as we think we are. It was as confronting back then as it is today, which is why I feel it's so important to talk about this case in 2024. Reena Virk was born on March 10, 1983, to her parents Suman and Manjeet Virk, who had immigrated to Canada from India and were now living in Saanich, British Columbia. She was the eldest of 3 children, and she spent much of her early years living in the community of View Royal, an area of more than 11,000 residents near Greater Victoria. Unlike most other families of Indian descent in Canada who practice Hinduism or Sikhism, Reena's parents converted to become Jehovah's Witnesses when she was a child. Because of this, I've read that her family was described as being, quote, a minority within a minority. They were rare. The rules at home, very, very strict, as Reena's parents were devout Jehovah's Witness. No smoking, no swearing, no celebrations of holidays or special days like birthdays. Certain music and clothing were absolutely banned. For a teenage girl, it would have been difficult to follow because it wasn't a path that she would have chosen for herself. And Reena, she already had struggled with her self-confidence and dealing with bullies. All around, it was a troubling time. It started in elementary school and then moved into middle school. Reena was bullied because of the way that she looked and because of her race. She began to change. She became angry and depressed, and she was even picking fights at school with the other kids. Being relentlessly bullied, especially from such an early age, it changes the very fabric of who a person is. It broke her parents' hearts to watch their beautiful daughter come home from school each day and then basically fall apart in front of them, emotionally drained from what she had to endure that day. In 1994, when Reena was 11 years old, they decided to move to a different neighborhood where she could attend a different school. They enrolled her at Burnside Elementary School, and at first, things seemed to be getting better. It was a fresh start, a chance to start over and make some friends. Their daughter appeared to be settling in well. She seemed really happy at first, but unfortunately that happiness was short-lived as one of her closest new friends turned her back on her, and then the bullying, it resumed. When she graduated to middle school, Reena found her place with a group of rebellious preteens. They were the kids who liked to drink, smoke, skip school, push back against authority. And because Reena was desperate to fit in wherever she could, she sort of changed to join this circle. It was also a way for her to protest her parents' strict religious rules. So she herself started to drink, smoke, and push back against authority, right along with them, as her parents desperately tried to keep her on the straight and narrow. They would remind her of the rules that she had to follow as a Jehovah's Witness, and they would read her scriptures, which only made Reena want to rebel even more. She wanted out of her parents' home any way possible, and she was about to do something that would shock her entire family. Now, I want to note here that Reena's father holds no ill will against her for what she did at the time. She was a very lost young girl who struggled to find her way amidst constant bullying. Because of her parents' strict religion, she wasn't finding the support that she desperately needed or wanted at home. In her young, naive mind, she felt like it would be better if she lived somewhere else, somewhere away from her parents. So she made up a lie. A really horrific lie that would tear their family apart. At 13 years old, Reena accused her father of sexually abusing her. She claimed that she had been physically, mentally, and sexually abused at home. One particularly horrendous story that she told involved being hit with a hammer, tied to a chair, and threatened with a heated barbecue utensil. Now, when a child tells a story like this, they should be immediately believed while things are being investigated, and she was believed. Her father, Manjeet, was arrested on charges of sexual abuse. She was removed from her parents' custody, and then at first she was placed with her grandmother for a short time. When this living situation didn't work out either, Reena was then placed into foster care. I want to note here that Reena's father denies these allegations, and the charges were later dropped because Reena herself admitted that she had lied about the abuse. Her family was seriously concerned that she was making up these stories just to get away from them, so they pushed for a full investigation to be done. If Reena was claiming to be getting hurt and they weren't the ones doing it at home, maybe someone else out there was. But unfortunately, Reena, she remained in foster care while none of her claims were ever investigated or corroborated by other sources. So as you can imagine, things did not improve for Reena while living in foster care. She was moved from a foster home into a group home eventually, and it was tough. She wasn't given the freedom that she desperately wanted, and she missed her family. While she admitted to authorities that she had lied about the abuse, she was forced to continue to live at the foster home, at the group home. Still, she tried to fix the broken relationship that she now had with her parents in hopes of someday being able to return home, even asking her foster family if she could spend the night at her parents' house every so often. Her family wasn't perfect, but she needed their love and support now more than ever. The bullying at school, it had only escalated. Her father would say that classmates would put gum in her hair, tease her about her appearance, and threaten to beat her up. Recently, she had been accused by some of the other local teen girls that she was spreading rumors. One of these girls accused Reena of trying to steal her boyfriend. Teenagers, in particular teenage girls, can be absolutely vicious. Typically, they aren't as physically violent as teenage boys, but any female who has gone to high school with other females know that they can destroy you to the core through lies and manipulation. In a letter to the Globe and Mail, Reena's father would write, quote, "I still remember the psychological scars Reena's school bullies left on her. She would cry, knowing that her friends weren't really her friends. She would plead to stay home from school altogether. But her self-esteem had been so wounded that her family's love wasn't enough. She craved acceptance by her, quote, friends, and needed it so badly that despite the risks, she carried on all the way to that fateful day at Craigflower Bridge in Saanich." Which brings us to November 14th, 1997. Reena was going to be spending the night at her family home. She was at her parents' house when she received a phone call inviting her to a social gathering. It was Friday night, and this was something that happened most Fridays, except Reena wasn't typically invited to participate. She was excited just to be included, so off she went to the field behind Shoreline High School, where Reena had previously attended. A large group of around 50 or 60 teens were all there socializing. They were drinking, smoking, having fun, just hanging out. She only knew a handful of the teens there, but she wanted more than anything to fit in and make friends. The police would show up due to a noise complaint, and the group dispersed, moving the party over to the Craigflower Bridge. This is where everything would come to a head. Suddenly, a group of 7 teenage girls and 1 boy formed a ring around Reena, screaming at her about the alleged rumors, calling her the most vicious names. According to one of the girls, Reena had recently stolen her notebook, which had the phone numbers of several boys in the area, and she told them lies about this girl, including that she had AIDS, her eyebrows were fake, and she was ugly. Just a bunch of silly stuff. This girl was furious when she found out that Reena had done this, and she hatched this plan with her other friends to make Reena pay for what she did. One of the girls put a burning cigarette out on Reena's forehead as the others began to repeatedly punch and kick her. Once this fight broke out, many of the teens at the gathering decided to take off, not wanting to get into any kind of trouble, while others moved closer so that they could watch the attack. No one stepped in to put a stop to the fight or to help Reena. According to one teen who stayed, Reena was crying out that she was sorry, but the attacks continued. She laid on the ground, bloody and battered, but eventually she was allowed to get up and she tried to get away. She was limping away across the bridge towards her home where she could get help. But 2 of the teenagers, 15-year-old Kelly Allard and 16-year-old Warren Glowatsky, weren't going to let her get away so easy. They followed her and grabbed her before she could escape. Reena was further punched and kicked. Her head was smashed against a tree, and then she was dragged towards the water under the bridge. To ensure that she would not get up again, her head was held under water until she stopped moving. She would not make it home to her parents that night. Instead, she laid under the bridge, out of sight to anyone who happened to pass by. While Suman and Manjeet Virk worried about where their daughter was, eventually reporting her missing to the police, students at Shoreline High School began to talk. Many who witnessed the group attack had seen Reena get up and leave, so they assumed things had ended there. But it wasn't long before whispers about how Reena Virk was no longer alive began to make their way through the halls. Allegedly, a pact was made between the 7 teenage girls and 1 boy who had beat her. No one was to talk about what had happened that night because they could all be implicated in her death. Meanwhile, Reena's parents pleaded with the police to take their daughter's disappearance seriously. Because she was a 14-year-old girl who had a history of rebellion and troubling behavior, the police believed that it was very likely she had run away and she would eventually turn back up. 2 Russian sisters who happened to live at the same foster home as Reena decided to call in a tip to the police when they heard the rumors that she was most likely dead. It would take 8 days for the police to locate Reena. Her battered, half-nude body was found in the water under the bridge. While many of the young teens were already aware of Reena's fate, her parents were learning about the violence inflicted upon her for the very first time, and they were devastated. What these teenagers did to this girl, it was unimaginable. An autopsy would reveal that Reena had sustained multiple blows to her abdomen. She had extensive injuries to her face and her head. She even had a bruise in the shape of a sneaker, which was found on the back of her brain. Ultimately, Reena had died from being drowned. Pebbles were found in her lungs, indicating that she was still alive when her head was pushed into the water. It was noted that if she had not been drowned, she likely would have died from the other extensive injuries to her body. Her body had sustained injuries that were as severe as if she had been in a car accident. It was shocking, and the community, they were not prepared to learn who amongst them had done something so evil. Thankfully, teenagers talk, and this horrific secret that they had tried so desperately to keep quiet, it came to light. The police pretty quickly learned about the fight that had broken out at the gathering under the bridge. There were a ton of witnesses who saw firsthand the brutal beatdown of Reena Virk. The group of 7 females and 1 boy, they were quickly identified, and the story of how 2 of these teens continued on to follow and kill Reena was revealed. It was 15-year-old Kelly Allard and 16-year-old Warren Glowatsky who had dealt the final blows. What would cause this group to so violently turn on a girl that they hardly knew? Why would these 2 teens, Kelly and Warren, follow Reena to ensure that she was dead? It all started just a few months before the gathering under the bridge. Kelly, who came from a middle-class, loving, and stable family, had found a close relationship in a troubled teen girl who has not been identified due to her age at the time. Together, they were a dangerous pair. They were mean girls who wanted to grow up someday to be career criminals, join the mob even. They would listen to really violent music, draw sketches of cops being killed by gangsters. They had a twisted, morbid perception of the world. Reena would have given anything to be included in that world. She so desperately wanted to fit in with this kind of group, no matter how toxic it was. Reena was insecure, she was jealous, and she was vulnerable, which is why she allegedly took the unidentified teen's notebook and called the boys in it to spread rumors about this girl. Now, this teen, along with her best friend Kelly, they plotted revenge against Reena, deciding that they would beat her up at the Friday night group gathering. Most of the other teens who were in attendance had no idea about this revenge plot. They were just there to hang out and have some fun. But when the fight finally broke out, 6 other girls and 1 boy who didn't even know Reena decided to jump in. Mob mentality. No one stepped in to put a stop to the beating or to help, but ultimately it was Kelly and Warren who murdered Reena Virk. Shockingly, Warren didn't even know Reena. He blindly participated in the beatdown. Growing up in a broken home, Warren claimed to be a part of the Crips, a street gang based out of California. His mother was an alcoholic, and she really wasn't a part of his life. She wasn't in the picture. She hardly raised him. His father had abandoned him to move to the United States with a woman who he met in Vegas. And at the time of the murder, he was pretty much all alone. He was living with a friend. He was an angry teenager who found belonging with the troubled crowd. Now, at this time in the late 90s in the Victoria, BC area, the teenage subculture was heavily influenced by LA street gangs. It was considered cool and trendy to be a criminal, a gangster, part of the Bloods or Crips, even if they didn't have any real affiliation. That's why no one really batted an eye when this mob of teenagers viciously beat this one girl. When the police interviewed Warren, he turned on Kelly right away, claiming that, he had followed Reena and he helped to drag her back underneath the bridge. But he alleged that it was Kelly who had held Reena's head under the water to drown her. Kelly, on the other hand, denied everything. Instead, she said that it was all just a rumor and she was being used as a scapegoat. Kelly claimed that Reena's killer was probably her friend, the unidentified teen who had her notebook stolen. She maintained this position despite the fact that so many other teens who were present named her specifically as the one who did it, as well as Warren. Even though they were minors at the time of the murder, because of the extreme nature of the crime, Kelly and Warren were arrested and charged with aggravated assault and murder. The 6 other girls who had taken part in the group beating, forever dubbed the Shoreline Six, they would be charged as youths. Their identities would be withheld, including the girl who allegedly had her notebook stolen by Reena, sparking this entire situation. 3 of the girls pled guilty to assault causing bodily harm, while the other 3 fought their charges at trial, but they were still found guilty, all of them. Kelly and Warren's aggravated assault and murder trials could not have gone any more different. Warren was represented by a public defender because he couldn't afford his own counsel. He took full responsibility for his role in Reena's murder. He confessed to pretty much everything, and he was found guilty of second-degree murder. He received a life sentence, which, if you've listened to my podcast for any length of time, you know is not actually a life sentence at all in Canada. But the positive here is that while he was behind bars, he participated in a restorative justice program, which has a goal of reconciling offenders and victims. It's all about healing. It was during one of these sessions he was actually able to meet Reena's parents and apologize to them for what he did right to their faces. He acknowledged to them what he had done. He admitted that he was wrong, and then he even exchanged hugs with both her mother and her father. I'm not sure that I could be so forgiving, but again, I have never had to deal with the grief of losing a child. Reena's mother would later say, quote, "I think the most important reason why we've forgiven Warren is so we can just put this whole matter aside and for our own healing and sense of wholeness." Reena's parents supported his request for full parole, which he received in 2010. As for Kelly, it would take 3 trials and many years to finally convict her for her actions. In March of 2000, she went to trial for the first time, and she pleaded not guilty. This pretty young girl showed up to court all buttoned up with her well-established family standing behind her, fully supporting her. They hired the best lawyer that money could buy, who argued that there was no physical evidence to tie Kelly to Reena's murder, which was true. The prosecution didn't have any fingerprints or any DNA. However, they did have a mountain of witnesses who claimed that they saw Kelly viciously beating Reena, including Warren, who claimed that he was standing there while Kelly forced Reena's head under the water. According to Kelly and her lawyers, these were just simply rumors and they were not to be believed. Still, the jury found her guilty and she was convicted of second-degree murder. However, that ruling was short-lived. She successfully appealed the conviction on the grounds that she had been improperly questioned and didn't receive a fair trial. While waiting for a new trial, she was released from prison, and this is when she assaulted a 58-year-old woman in a park. With this new charge of assault, she was sent back to prison to wait for her second trial. 4 years later, her second trial would begin. Again, she denied any wrongdoing, and she claimed that she was just being used as a scapegoat. According to Kelly, it was others in the group who had killed Reena. A mistrial was declared due to the jury being deadlocked. Unfortunately for Reena's family, who have already had to deal with all of these other trials, there would need to be a third for Kelly. This time, in April of 2005, Kelly was reconvicted of murder and sentenced to life with no eligibility for parole for 7 years. And as I said, life in Canada isn't life at all. She appealed and the conviction was overturned, but this time the Supreme Court of Canada stepped in and reinstated the conviction and the sentence. During her time in prison, Kelly was anything but well-mannered, and she received a dozen of infractions, including attempting to make shivs out of toothbrushes. She was addicted to drugs, and behind bars, she became pen pals with a 41-year-old former felon, who she was allowed to have conjugal visits with, which in my opinion should never be a thing, especially for a person convicted of murder. She became pregnant, surprise, surprise, and she had her first baby, a son, behind bars. During all 3 of her trials and the majority of her prison sentence, Kelly continued to deny her involvement in Reena's murder. However, she had a change of heart when it was time for her parole hearing. This time, she admitted that she had participated in some of the beating, and she was there down by the water with Reena, but she wasn't trying to drown her. She simply wanted to splash some water on Reena's face to see if maybe she could get her to regain consciousness. Kelly claimed that she had changed since the birth of her son. Kelly would change her name to Carrie Sim, and she would go on to have a second baby behind bars as a result of this conjugal visit with the boyfriend. While she appealed for a full parole, she was denied, but she has been granted day parole as part of a program to eventually reintegrate her back into the community. In 2016, a risk assessment found that Kelly, she has a moderate to high moderate risk of future violence, so thankfully, she hasn't been released back into the public just yet. As for Reena's parents, over the years since their daughter was so carelessly taken from them by a group of violent teens, They have turned their trauma and pain into the driving force behind their anti-bullying campaigns. They pushed for the government to crack down on teen violence and bullying in schools. They've toured around to different schools, sharing the tragic story of what happened to their daughter at the hands of her peers. Reena's mother, Suman, would pass away due to a choking accident that happened while she was dining at a local restaurant. She was only 58 years old. But her message, to greet others with an open hand instead of the fist, is just as relevant then as it is today. Reena's memory can be honored in acknowledging the mistakes, the wrongdoings, and the negligence of the past, and by creating change through simple actions every day of your life. There is just as much bullying in schools today as there was back then in the 90s. Things are a little bit different now with the internet and social media, but the ramifications of what this does to children and teens, they're just as serious. No one can solve the bullying problem by themselves, but you can help by teaching your children to be kind, empathetic, and an individual who thinks for themselves and stands up when they see something wrong. If someone, anyone, would have stood up and helped Reena, maybe tried to get help and called 911, she'd probably still be alive today, having just turned 41 years old. Collectively, as a society, we need to do better. That's it for me tonight. If you want to reach out, you can find me on Facebook at Serial Napper. I also have a true crime discussion group. It's called Serial Society, and I'll have the link in my show notes. I'd love to chat with you about this case and all of the other cases, plus more. You can find my audio on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. I post all of my episodes in video format over on YouTube, so go check it out. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'd love if you can give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Every little bit helps. I'm over on X, formerly known as Twitter, at serial_napper, and I also post things on TikTok, Serial Napper Nick, and that's all one word. Until next time, sweet dreams, stay kind, especially in the comments. Bye.